Creating multi-column layouts, just like this one, is a breeze in Webflow because of the grid layout feature. You can easily control the columns, the rows, and even the gap between these. On top of all, everything is fully responsive. And the grid layout is just one of the tools you can use to create advanced layouts in Webflow. Hey, I'm Adi for Envato Tuts Plus, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to create 5 of these complex layouts. In the first chapter, we'll focus exclusively on multi-column layouts, and we're going to create a blog index, a product listing for an e-commerce website, and finally a masonry grid. And I'm going to show you a very interesting technique for doing that. In the second chapter, we'll focus on building advanced layouts by using positioning and Flexbox. So for that, we'll create a client logo list and also a sticky header with a logo and a nav menu. So this is a very hands-on video, and I recommend you work alongside me. Now, before we get into all that, here's something that I think you might be very interested in. Envato Elements offers all the creative digital assets you need under one subscription. Customize your project today by adding unique photos, fonts, graphics, and themes. For more information, check out the links in the video description. All right, let's kick things off by creating some multi-column layouts. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more content like this. All right, let's go ahead and create some multi-column layouts, and we're going to start with a blog index. And we're going to work off of some Figma designs. This is a simple grid that you would find in a blog index, right? And we have like an image for each blog post, and then a date and a title. So I made these quickly in Figma. I exported all the assets in Webflow. And now it's time to recreate these really quickly. So we're going to start by creating a single blog post. All right, so first of all, we have an image. So let's grab the image from there. Let's also create a div. And we're going to call this blog post. We're going to give it a class of blog post. Let's go ahead and put the image inside, like so. And then let's add a paragraph. Yeah, let's give this a class of blog post meta. So this should be under the image, like so. And it should say the date. Okay, don't worry about styling just yet. We'll get there. And let's add, I don't know, maybe like an H2, something like that. Or like an H4. Or actually, this is called a heading. We're going to choose H4 from here. Okay, and let's give this a class of H4. Cool, so now for the styling, the text, 1832. So 1832. It's using man rope light. Okay, and as for the color, we have this one with an opacity of 50%, just like so. And then for the other text, we're using Poppins bold 2740. So let's see, Poppins bold 2740, color should be this. And work on that letter spacing for a little bit. In terms of spacing, we have 16 pixels between them and also 32 pixels from the image. So actually, we're going to create another div in here, and we're going to call it meta. And we're going to place the H4 and the paragraph like so. Let's make this flex vertical so I can set a gap 16 pixels in between. And let's remove these margins. Okay. And then I'm going to select the whole blog post. Also use Flexbox, vertical, set 32 pixels between the post and the image. All right. So now we have one blog post. To create this layout where we have 2 columns and then 1 row, we need to use the grid system, right? And we can easily do that by going to the plus sign here and selecting grid, or we can press Control or Command E to bring up this find anything. And here we can type grid, enter, and that's going to create a grid for us. So we want a 2-column grid, right? So 2 columns and 1 row, basically, right? Other rows will be auto-generated if we need to. And each column is equal in size, 1 fraction of the available space. In terms of the gap, I'm using 32 pixels. So let's set 32 right here. And I'm going to click Done. So now what I can do is actually I'm going to move the grid back here to the body, and then I'm going to move the blog post to the grid. Perfect. So now it's simply a matter of duplicating blog post 3 more times. Let's actually set a nice padding here. Let's say 32 pixels so we can see what's going on. And then it's just a matter of replacing the content, right? So here we can double click on the image, replace, and we can choose the other one that we had, the library. Here, replace. We can choose the one with the stock market, and here, replace, and choose this one. Cool. So now, finally, just replace the text on all of these. You can also go ahead and replace the date, of course, but I'm fine with it. One thing I'm going to do is select this H4 class. I'm not particularly fond of this line height, so I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. And because we're working with classes here in Webflow, all the other elements that are using that class will change automatically, which is fantastic. And then blog post, I'm also going to change the gap here to 16. Or sorry, I meant the meta class. I'm going to change the gap here to 8, just so we can reduce the spacing between this text and this text. And there you have it. That's a really quick grid or advanced layout created using the grid layout function in Webflow. So that's one example of how to use the grid layout in Webflow. Let's look at another one. What about this e-commerce product listing, right? We also have a grid here showing a couple of products, and each product has an image. It has a title, price, rating, small description, and an add to cart button. So let's see how we would go about creating this in Webflow. And just like previously, we're going to start with just one item. So in here, I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to call this product. Inside, we're going to add an image. So we're going to go for this. Great. Let's add a background image to this, or a background color. And let's grab this color from here. Just like that. We also have an 8-pixel border radius. So let's do that. Cool. Underneath, let's add a piece of text. Let's do actually heading 4, heading, or heading 5, actually. Let's do that. Let's create an H5 class. Let's duplicate that. For the price, you can press Control or Command D to duplicate. Now, these two should stay side by side, and this is a great opportunity to use Flexbox. So I'm going to create yet another div. I'm going to call this product meta. And inside product meta, I'm going to bring in these two H5 elements. And product meta, we're going to set it to Flexbox, horizontal, align everything in the middle, and set the justification to space between. So one is on one side and the other is on the other side. Cool. Next, inside the product, we need to add the stars here. So we have 5 stars with a distance of 8 pixels in between. So let's create another div. Let's call them stars, or create a div. Let's call it rating. And inside here, let's grab an image. Let's choose the star. Great. Let's select that. Duplicate it. And finally, inside the rating, let's add a paragraph that just says 21, which is the number here. So let's select rating. Let's place the paragraph right at the end. So select rating. We're going to use Flexbox again, align everything in the middle, like so. And let's set a gap of 8 px pixels. This paragraph should be man rope 14. So let's set some text styles here. 14 pixels. Let's say 1.2 dash. This is a unitless value. So 1.2 for the line height means 1.2 times the font size. Great. And let's see. Let's also remove the margin from that paragraph. And also, I think the spacing here in Flexbox could be a bit smaller, maybe like 4 pixels, just like that. Finally, we have a piece of text. So let's add another paragraph. And finally, a button that says add to cart. So let's add the button, and the button text should say add to cart. Cool. Now let's do a little bit of styling. So for the text, let's change the color. Let's actually select the whole product and change the color from there. So all the, or most of the text will inherit that. So let's see, Poppins bold 24 pixels, right? So the H5 is going to be Poppins bold 24 pixels and 1.3 or 130% line height. The paragraph is man rope 1832. Okay, and the color is 64% of this. So we'll go 64% alpha. Awesome. And finally, the add to cart button. In terms of text, we're using 14 pixels, bold. So man rope, 14 pixels, bold. And a 1.2. And then background color, we're going to set it to transparent, but we are going to add a border, 1 pixel. Let's say 1 pixel, and it should have this color here. And let's round off those corners. We need to use 8 pixels. So border radius, 8 pixels, just like that. And let's see, why is the text not showing up? Okay, and the text color, a bit buggy there. There we go. Cool. And finally, let's add some spacing here. So we have 16 from the image, and the rest is 16. Okay. So we're going to select the product, and we're going to change this to Flexbox, vertical, and set a 16 pixel gap between every single element. And let's also align everything to the start so it's not stretching. Okay, and this actually, let's set a width of 100%. And also this, let's set a width to 100%. So it's 100% of its parent element. Cool. So we have one of these products created. Now, to achieve this grid, again, we're going to go to the body. We're going to add a grid element. And here we want 3 columns. So I'm going to add one more. Rows should be automatic, which means if there is not enough content to fit in these 3 columns in the first row, a new row will automatically be created. So let's hit done, and let's start bringing in the products. So that's grid 1. Here, let's also add just some padding, really. Something like this. And then it's simply a matter of duplicating that initial product and changing, the images, just like we did previously, the images and the text. And here also, I forgot to add 64 pixel gap. That's the gap between the columns and also between the rows. Cool. So there you go. A second example of how to use the grid layout inside Webflow, or the grid functionality, to create one of these advanced layouts for an e-commerce website. Now, the layouts we made so far are pretty straightforward. What about a masonry layout? I'm sure you've seen one of these before. It basically consists of several elements of different heights arranged in a brick pattern, hence the name of masonry. Well, as it turns out, it's quite simple to create one in Webflow, so let me show you. So this is what we have to work with. We have entries from a portfolio here, and their structure is exactly the same. We have an image, followed by maybe a category, and then followed by the name of the project. But the catch here is that each image is different in height. This is smaller, this is larger, smaller again, larger, larger, and then smaller. So as you can see, this creates this masonry-looking layout. But how do you do that in Webflow? Because if we were to use the grid layout, then each row will be as tall as the tallest image in it, right? Or the tallest element. So, for example, the second row will actually start at the top edge of this image. And that doesn't create the masonry effect. But before we get there, let's quickly create these images or these portfolio entries. And for that, let's create a new div here. And I'm going to call this masonry. And I'm just going to paste in one of the blog entries we created earlier because it's very similar in structure, right? So let's actually update the text here. We're not going to worry too much about the class names right now. It's just a demo, and we're going to change the image here, right? So we're going to replace it with, let's see which one is the first image. It's this one right here. Now let's actually set a height on this image. We're going to set a height of, what do we have here? 480 pixels, okay? And I'm going to set the fit to cover. Now, let me actually add just a bit of padding here. I would say about 64 pixels should do the trick for the main masonry bit. And then let's duplicate this and load the next image. Okay, and this image is 800 pixels. So let's do, I don't know, 880 pixels should do the trick. And actually, we need to use a different class here. So let's say large. So image2 and large. And this large one will be, let's say 880 pixels. And let's do one more. This is for branding. Okay, and this is also 480 pixels, right? So we're gonna delete that large image. Cool. So now we have one smaller image, one larger image, and again, one smaller image. Now, how do I create a multi-column layout out of these three? Well, it's actually quite simple. Instead of using the grid layout, I'm going to select masonry here, and I'm going to scroll down to where it says typography. And here, where it says columns, I'm going to type in the number of columns that I want. Let's say 2. Okay, and that automatically created 2 columns for me. And if I click on these 3 dots, I can change, the gap between these items. Let's say 96 pixels. And I can even choose a divider between them if I want to. But essentially, this is the stuff that we're currently interested in. Now, the cool part is, if I'm going to add some new items in here, they'll automatically be arranged in these 2 columns. So let's say I want to duplicate this blog post or this entry and maybe add, like a smaller one and then a smaller one, right? So this gets arranged automatically for me, which is fantastic. I can even choose one of these blog posts and I can add a combo class that says with grid, and I can, add some margin bottom, just to space them out a little bit. So now I've just created a masonry layout with these portfolio entries by using, this is actually called the multi-column layout in CSS. So what we did is we selected the parent element. We set how many columns we want. We set the gap between them. So this gap right here, and actually this should be, 96 pixels. That's correct. And then if I want 3 columns, I can do that really easily. It's gonna display this content in 3 columns. But let's keep this at 2 columns. And those 3 are examples of some common but advanced layouts you can build with Webflow. Now, all the layouts I showed you so far are multi-column layouts, but that's not always the case. Just because a layout is more advanced, it doesn't have to be multi-column. So in the next chapter, I want to show you 2 examples of layouts that don't necessarily involve the creation of multiple columns. And we'll create those by using Flexbox and positioning. To kick things off, let's start with a pretty simple layout that's using Flexbox, and that's a client logo list. If we look in Figma, this is what we need to create. So basically we have a piece of text and then a list of logos. And this is a pretty common pattern you find in web design where people show, the logos of the companies they worked with. So how would you create this in Webflow? It's quite simple, actually. Let's create a div first. And we're going to call this logo list. And inside, let's add a paragraph and let's paste in that text. And let's also grab the color that we're using there. Let's change it here. And let's also change the padding top and bottom, 96 pixels. Like this. The text itself, let's grab the color code. Let's change the text here, and it should be 16 pixels with a 1.4 or 100% line height. And then let's bring in the logos, right? So in here, let's create another div. We'll call this list. And inside, let's bring in an image. And let's choose one of our logos. Let's choose the Adobe one. And then I'm simply going to do Command or Control D to duplicate. And then replace. The order in which we're loading this doesn't really matter right now. Cool. Now, a couple of things. First of all, this logo list is currently set as Flexbox, right? In a horizontal direction, which means items are stacked one next to each other. We want this to be vertical, so we're going to swap it here. We want everything to be aligned in the middle and also justified in the middle, right? We want everything to be in the center of this parent element. But I do want the spacing here to be 32 pixels, so about 2 rems. Now, to make the logos look like this, so be one next to each other, have a spacing between them of 64 pixels and being center aligned, I can select the list element. I can change its layout from block to flex. I can leave it at horizontal. I'm going to change its alignment to center and thus make sure that vertically everything is aligned. And I'm going to justify them. Well, I have a couple of options here, but I'm going to justify them to the center. And I'm going to choose the gap of 64 pixels. Of course, if we were working with rems, we could do divided by 16 rems, and that will give you the value of 4. And that's how easy it is to create one of these layouts with Flexbox. Do I want to increase the gap? Well, I can do it from here. I can say 10 rems, and that's going to be spaced apart even more. I can, set a padding 64 pixels on this element, and I can have this one set to space between or space around, but usually space between does the trick. And I can change the width here to 100%. So now this will be, or this will behave like this, right? It's going to be 100%, and it's always going to keep an equal space between those items. And that's just the power of Flexbox. You can do a lot of things with this. Now, Flexbox is amazing, and you can use it for all sorts of layouts. The one that you saw is a good example. Another example would be a header, right? Where you have one logo that you need to align to one side, a navigation menu, or some icons that you need to put to the other side. And on top of that, you might want to make that header sticky, right? So it stays in the same place when you scroll up and down the page. For that, you would be using some positioning styles. So let me show you an example for that. So what we need to create is something like this, something very simple. It's a header that has logo and a bit of navigation here on the left side, and then some icons here on the right side. And we also want to make this sticky, so when we scroll up and down the page, it's going to stay in the same place. So to create it, let's start with a new div, and we can call this header. And inside, let's add an image. Yeah, so we're going to grab the logo, and we're going to grab the navigation. So for that, we're actually going to create another div inside, and we're going to call it left side. Oops. And let's duplicate this, and we're going to call it right side. Okay, so the image is on the left side. Let's also add a paragraph, or actually, you know what, not a paragraph, maybe a text link. Okay, because we basically have text here about us. Let's call this menu item, and let's duplicate it. So this should say contact. Great. And then finally, at the other end, we have two social icons. Right, so in the right side, let's grab an image, or actually a link block, okay, in which we're going to put an image. So let's grab what was it? Twitter and Instagram. Now let's put that inside the link block and then duplicate that. And let's put the Instagram icon. Cool. So now in here, there is a couple of ways we can use Flexbox. First of all, we're going to select the right side and we're going to set it to flex, horizontal, make sure everything is aligned properly. And let's change the alignment there to the right side. And let's also add a space between of 64 pixels. Or actually, it's a bit too much there. Let's do 24 pixels like that. And we're also going to add Flexbox here for the left side. So, you know, same thing, basically. Let's do 32 pixels there. Let's select the entire header, and we'll also add Flexbox to this. Same thing. This time, we're going to set the justification to space between, right? So because we just have two children, one is going to be on the left, one is going to be on the right, and the remaining space is going to be placed right in between. Let's also add, you know, just a tiny bit of padding here. Maybe like 32 pixels, like that. And let's see about these menu items. So 16 pixels, pop-ins medium, 16 and 24. And let's also copy the correct color from there. Great. So now we also have a line here, like a border bottom. So let's select the header. Let's go to the border section right here. And let's just select the border bottom. 1 pixel radius, paste in that color. It should be 10% opacity, right? So just a tiny little border there. Okay, so that's our header, right? So far we used Flexbox to create this kind of a advanced layout. But how do we make it sticky? Well, to see that in action, let's actually bring this all the way up. And I'm gonna, you know, change these. I'm gonna make them visible again. So masonry, this was what? This was display block, I believe. Yeah. And the logo list was actually Flexbox. Okay. So now if we take a look at the preview, we can see that the header is like static, right? It scrolls at the same time as the page does. If we want it to stay in place, we're going to go ahead and select it, and we're going to scroll down until we see position here. And instead of static, we're going to select sticky. And we're going to choose relative to body, right? Because that's what we need to listen to for scroll events. And I'm going to change here like the offset, basically. And I'm also going to give it a background. Instead of transparent, we're going to make it white. Okay, so now you'll see that when I scroll, that header stays in place. And instead of that value of 30, let's actually change that to 0. Right, so that it's not pushed down. And now instead, we'll just get a nice sticky header, just like that. That stays in place when we scroll up and down the page and sits in its default position when we're right at the top of the page. Something else you can experiment with here is position fixed, right? So let's select that. And instead of sticky, you can choose fixed. This one will actually position the element relative to the browser window, right? It behaves a little bit differently than sticky. It still stays in place. Sticky has a bit more options. And, you can read a lot more about it. There's a tutorial by Webflow on how to use this properly. But yeah, for this demo, using Flexbox, using the positioning styles to create a sticky header with a logo and a navigation menu. Quite easy, just like you saw. And there you have it, 5 advanced layouts created in Webflow by using grid layout, multi-column layout, positioning, and Flexbox. Of course, there is a lot more to discover here. There are tons of layouts you can do in Webflow, and I encourage you to do a bit of exploration on your own just to figure out exactly what you can do with this amazing piece of software. With that said, thank you very much for watching. As always, don't forget to check out the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel for more content like this, but also to learn about web design, web development, and a whole lot more. It's all free, so make sure to also hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'm Adi, and until next time, take care.